Welcome back, guys, to the recap of round number 4 of the European Chess Championship. And today I won my game against Nils Grandelius, former Super Grandmaster from Sweden. I think also numerous times Swedish champion. He was also on the team with Magnus Carlsen, I think, at least for one World Championship match. So he's a fantastic chess player, and on top of that, he's also a very nice and humble guy. I am fortunate enough to know him personally pretty well. We're pretty good friends, which is of course also not that easy always to play against your friends. And yeah, I just don't like winning against my friends, especially don't like losing, of course, as well. But there's always some sort of touch with it, which is not that great, but you cannot avoid it if you're paired in a tournament, which is that important. You gotta play, and yeah, that's just it. By the way, I just realized that I forgot to record the video in the morning, so I'll just briefly tell you now about the game strategy. So I had the black pieces and I mostly prepared for e4, which is his main move, but more recently he switched to d4, c4, knight f3, so I also checked that a little bit, but as we will see, he surprised me pretty quickly in the opening. So he went for d4, I went d5, c4, e6, knight c3 and knight f6. And this is usually something I don't do. Usually I go for the Nimzo Indian with this transposition. And after e6, knight c3, I go bishop b4. But in this game, I wanted to try something else, technically allowing white to go for the Karlsbad or for the semi-Tarrasch. But he didn't have that in mind. He went bishop g5 instead. Now bishop e7. So now we had a very, very classical line on the board. I think, if I didn't recall incorrectly, d takes e4 was also one move, but there was something to know. I think it was e4 c5, and it was a bit complicated. I think this was one of the lines here. Yeah, bishop f6, queen f6, d5, and white will have some squares here, on some light squares. Black will play for the dark squares, which is also okay, but I haven't checked this in quite a while, so I didn't want to go there. Just went for bishop e7, e3, short castle, knight f3, and now I played knight bd7. Not the only move, of course. h6 is probably the main move here, and now white has, I would say, two moves, bishop f6 being one of them, bishop h4 the other one, and here there's this, I think it's called the Lasker line, which is, I think, still very solid for black. Usually black will take on c3, and then he's a bit passive, but usually black equalizes sooner or later here. The other choice, which maybe he would have done, is to go for this, and then white has some ideas with h4 and then g4, starting some sort of kingside attack, and often white even castles long, queen c2 long castle. So I didn't want to go h6 here. Instead, I went knight bd7, which is actually a line which can also arrive from another move order. If white goes for this normal queen's gambit, now knight bd7, bishop g5, and now bishop e7, e3, short castle, and we are back in the game. So this is just about the move orders. So I played knight bd7, and here he played queen b3, which I was not familiar at all with. And probably I didn't react in the best way. I played c6, and after bishop e2, h6. What's probably better is to go h6 right away, because in the game he went back with the bishop to f4, but if he goes here now, I probably have some ideas with c5. But in the game I played c6 first, and after bishop e2, now h6, now c5 doesn't make a lot of sense, since I just played c6 and white is basically one whole tempo out. So maybe h6 first is a bit more accurate, and now if bishop h4, now I could at least transpose possibly back to the game with c6. Maybe I could also try something else here. So yeah, he played bishop f4. My idea after bishop h4 was probably to go for this idea knight e8, which is often one plan for black. In general, I wasn't at all familiar with this line with queen b3 at all. Usually white goes for queen c2, and I felt like the queen is often somewhat misplaced on b3 actually. Knight e8, of course, not the only move here. I guess black can also do something else, like maybe a5, possibly playing a4 and targeting white's queen. But this knight e8 plan is often an idea as well. And if white takes, then the knight usually goes to d6, often urging white to take on d5, and then this sort of Karlsbad structure is very playable. And again, here I think the queen on b3 is misplaced, and the queen on c2 would be a lot better than white can start a minority attack right away. But he went bishop f4 back, and now I went for d takes c4. Here I was spending a bit too much time actually. I spent half an hour by here, and it was only the 9th move, so I should have played a bit faster. Computer even gives here that c5 is still working, which is kind of surprising to me, but I guess that's also somehow working. I was briefly thinking about it, but after cd5 it looked like maybe I will even lose a pawn here. Computer gives cd4, and now knight d4 probably doesn't work because of e5. And if e takes d4, what happens? Knight b6, I can give this pawn here. Okay, not entirely obvious. So I went for dc4 with the concrete idea after queen c4 with knight d5. If bishop c4 now, I thought I could go for some b5 and then later on c5. With queen c4, b5 doesn't work because then the pawn on c6 is hanging. So here I went for knight d5, bishop g3, and queen b6. This was my whole idea. And in the game, I wasn't sure at all if this is correct, but it seems like it's working. My idea was just to grab the pawn on b2 after short castle, which here often white has more than enough compensation. But his queen on c4 is also a bit misplaced probably. I was thinking about knight a4 here. And here I think I wanted to play queen a3 when, again, there's this b5 threat, maybe knight b6 also. So maybe here it's not very safe for white to give this pawn. Instead he went for queen b3, and this endgame I felt like white is probably a little bit better, but I didn't feel like it should be that big of an issue. I went for knight b4, short castle. By the way, bishop b4 doesn't do much. White can just go rook c1, and I actually want to have the knight on b4, not the bishop. So I played knight b4, short castle, b6, knight d2, and here I played bishop b7. The other idea was to go for a5, but I didn't like a5 because now the pawn on b6 is somewhat weak. But probably this would have been better, since in the game I never played a5, but then the pawn on a7 was always hanging, so I never could move my rook from a8. So I played bishop b7, bishop f3, now knight f6, and I wanted to block off this bishop on f3 by putting my knight on d5. Rook c1, rook d8, that was all pretty logical, I think. Instead of rook c1, he could have also tried bishop d6, which I was a bit afraid of, since if he can exchange my only active piece, basically, or my good bishop at least, bishop on b7 is comparably pretty bad. I thought I could be under some pressure. I think I intended to go rook d8, possibly, or even taking, and I think now bishop a6 was one idea, when I'll go rook d8 next and then kick out the knight on d6 again. So I'm a bit worse here, but I thought it's not the end of the world. He went rook c1, rook d8, knight e4, and here the computer says it's still around equal, but here it felt already pretty unpleasant for me, because he has all these ideas with knight d6, and I don't really have that much of a plan myself, since c5 for the moment doesn't work. Let's say c5 here right away, then just d takes c5, and if I take here, then white has all sorts of ideas. Knight a5 is in the picture. Pawn on c5 will probably drop. So I thought this doesn't work. Instead I went bishop a6, which is also somewhat of a strange move, because the bishop is also somehow hanging often here. And I did not really see a plan for me. He went h4, which I think is a good move. Just trying to gain space here. And anyway, I don't really have a plan here. I think bishop a6 was wrong. I was also thinking about g5 here. Actually, not a bad move. Maybe I should have went for g5. My idea was just that often I have ideas with f5, but somehow I didn't like that it does weaken the light squares here, but probably g5 is best, and then already I have, again, some ideas with f5. This was my first choice, but then I just went for bishop a6. So I guess I should trust my instincts here a bit more. By the way, one more thing, after rook c1, I was also thinking about c5, but I'm not sure if it's working. It's also not that bad, but after bishop d6, again, I'm under some pressure. Okay, that makes sense. That's why I went rook d8. And here f5 is probably a bit too much. But yeah, it wasn't easy to see anything else. The computer gave g6 is the best move, and then just to kind of wait around. But yeah, practically speaking, pretty unpleasant for black. I went for f5, knight c3, and now I went back with the bishop to b7, because often it is hanging on a6. So this whole bishop a6, bishop b7 didn't make a lot of sense. I just admitted my mistake and just went back. Now I went knight e5, and I played g5. I was a bit afraid that he would go h5 himself, and then I have this weak square on g6, and then I will never have any counterplay on the king side anymore. But it was not entirely correct, this whole operation. But here he already went wrong with bishop h2. And yeah, then c5 let me completely equalize. Instead, now he should have taken on d5. And after e takes d5, I assume we both thought about this, but I think we both missed this idea with bishop e2. And yeah, white is just much better. He has ideas with knight d3 to exchange this knight. And during the game, it did not seem fully obvious to me, probably to him as well. But yeah, now I'm fully weakened on the king side. The knight on e5 is a monster as well. And here I'm much worse. So this would have been quite a lot of suffering. But instead he went bishop e2, bishop h2, which surprised me a lot. I thought that his idea is probably to go g4 in some cases. But yeah, also maybe the bishop on h2 often doesn't run into f4 with tempo on the bishop. So I guess these were the two ideas. But now I went c5, and now I can finally free my pieces. D takes c5, bishop takes c5. And now he went knight a4, which again surprised me a little bit. I thought that g4 is the best move here. And computer also gives it g4, I just checked. And I intended to go bishop d6, and just to trade my bishop for the knight on e5, because the knight on e5 is just super strong. And once the knight is gone, I might also be able to jump into d3. So this position is probably around equal. He went knight a4, bishop d6, but yeah, now he blundered, and after that, actually, the game was more or less over. e4 was a big mistake. Instead, he should go for something normal like rook d1, and probably I would have went for something like g4. But yeah, white should probably not lose this. It's equal material, and yeah, should probably be a draw if both sides play well. But he went e4, and I think what he missed is bishop e5, and now knight d3. And yeah, now everything is just hanging. He has to take on d5, and now knight takes e5, and now I will at least win a pawn. He went knight c3. I was thinking that he would probably take here, and I was actually not so sure what I would do. I thought maybe I can take here, and then the king on g1 is often in a mating net. For example, rook c7, rook d4 was something I calculated. There was one nice line, knight takes b6, and I can just go rook h4 here, and I will give checkmate on the next move on h1. But yeah, I'm not so sure. Here I was still thinking about king h2, rook h4 check, king g3, bishop d5, and I thought it should be good for me because the pawn on e6 is hanging and f4 is a mating threat. So probably this would have been good. Let me just see. Yeah, this was okay. Rook c3 is the best defense. Apparently also rook d6 is good here. So yeah, this is objectively winning at least for me. So we went back knight c3, now g4, not the best move. I also thought about knight f3 here, and I realized that this rook endgame is just a draw because white is very active. Rook c7, rooks on the 7th rank are always very strong, especially if I don't have any pawns here. Now my king is also somewhat weak. But the computer gave king f7 here, which I didn't think about at all, and it's also around minus 1.6 according to the computer. So should also be winning, but g4 seemed more logical to me. He went bishop d1. Again, in accuracy, the computer gives rook e1, which is a very hard move, especially if you're just on seconds. You have to see knight b4, rook e3. Now knight b4 I saw, and now maybe bishop d1, but still it's, yeah, doesn't look very promising at all for white. So he went back bishop d1, but now bishop takes d5, and this sort of endgame I thought should be a technical win, since after rook c7, I guess I could go a5, but I can also exchange this active rook on c7. Instead he went knight b5, but now a5, knight c7, rook c8, and I was fortunate that he doesn't have any tactical ideas here. Everything just works for me. Rook c3, king f7, now knight takes d5. If he goes rook c1 here, I intended to go bishop c6, when he cannot take here, because in the end I'm picking up the bishop on d1, and just I assume rook d7, just winning the other exchange, the other knight. And yeah, bishop c6 I thought is just over. If knight b7, I think I calculated bishop b7, and I thought this should be pretty easily winning after rook d7. Probably the knight is also trapped. So he went for knight takes d5 here, and rook c1, rook c3, rook takes d3. Maybe bc is a bit better, but again, it should be a technical win. I will activate my king at some point. My pawns will roll, so this should be win. He went rook c3, d4, rook c7 check, rook d7, rook c8, rook d6. I had two ideas. One was rook c6, and then he has to take, otherwise I will get rook c1. The other idea is just to protect the pawn on b6 for later, that this is never hanging. He played king f1, and the other idea which I had was knight d3, because if I go knight d3 here, then after bishop c2, knight takes b2, bishop f5, white wins a very important tempo on the rook. So I went king f1, after rook d6, knight d3, bishop c2, and now knight takes b2. I thought maybe it's better to go rook c2, but from a practical point of view, actually bishop c2 is probably better, since after rook c2, yeah, white has just no active play at all. I would have probably went for knight c5. I still wasn't sure it, but now the rook is also extremely passive. Pawn on b3 is extremely weak, so I guess this should be more easily technically winning. At least after bishop c2, I have to calculate a bit. I went knight takes b2, bishop takes f5, and here d3, a small inaccuracy. I saw g3 briefly during the game, but yeah, I was just not patient enough. What did I actually think about here? I think rook c2 was my issue. Okay, knight d1, yeah, it's winning, but yeah, d3 seemed much more logical to me, because now he has to give up the bishop. And I felt like this should be winning, even though, of course, I have to be careful that these pawns will not be exchanged. But yeah, the point after g3 is that now if he takes, now I get a much better version since his pawn structure is just damaged. So when d3 takes d2, rook c2, forcing me to promote, and here knight takes d1 is very important. I also thought about rook takes d1, but after king e2, now rook b1, king d2 was the issue, and yeah, a4 was something I calculated, and now rook c7 was the issue. King has to move, and now king c2, and now I will lose the piece. So this was the whole issue here, which of course I had to see. Yeah, and I was lucky that I did. Otherwise, it would be a draw. But I went knight takes d1, king e2, b5. I also thought about king e6 here just to activate the king first, but I thought that b5 right away should win as well. He went rook c1, pushing my knight to b2, and now he went rook c5. If he goes rook c5 immediately, then my knight on d1 is actually very useful, because now he doesn't even threaten to take on b5. I wasn't actually sure what I want here. Maybe a4 is working. I could also just bring the king for now. I wasn't entirely sure. Rook d5 was one idea. Yeah, I saw that also in the game. Rook d5, and now if he takes, then this should be winning. But let me just see if a4 is also winning. Yeah, a4 is also winning here. So I went rook c1 and then rook c5, and here rook b6 was, I think, the last important moment in the game. Originally, I intended to go b4, which is probably also winning, but after rook takes a5, rook d3. Now, what I was actually more scared of was rook f5 check, king e6, and now rook f3, but this actually turns out to be winning. I analyzed this endgame a bit, and yeah, here I think the knight somehow came to c5, knight e4, knight c5, and I am winning somehow here, but I wasn't entirely sure about this either. But it turns out that white has a better defense with going rook e5, and after rook b3, now rook e4, and actually it's not so clear if this is even objectively winning. The king will go to the queen side, and now my pieces are pretty misplaced here. So rook b6 was important. He went king d2. The important thing to see here was that after rook c2, at first it looks like my knight is trapped, but I have rook e6 check. If the king goes to the f file, then I have knight d3. And if king d2, now I have another check, and after king e2, I thought I can go to b3 with the knight, and then again, sooner or later, my pawns will roll down the board. Important idea is that after rook d2, I always have this discover check, otherwise I would lose the knight due to the pin. So he went king d2, now a4, b takes a4, and now last important moment, knight takes a4. I also was thinking about ba4 for some time, but it did look kind of wrong, because it will be just a bit strange to take the outside pawn, the a pawn, instead of the b pawn, and especially here my rook is already behind the pawn, which is very good, and here white would have the chance to put his rook behind the pawn after king c2, then rook a5 will come, and actually this is even objectively a draw. I probably have no way to improve my piece's position here. So when knight takes e4, rook c7, king e6, and he tried to push his pawns, but I'm just much faster here, b4, and yeah, this is just winning. Computer says rook e7 is the best, but I assume there are numerous ways. Maybe even here I can probably just push the pawn already. He went king c2, b3 check, king b1, and now rook e6. And I'm just intending to put this mating net with knight d3 and then rook e1. He went f5, rook e1 check, king b2, rook e2, and after king b1, knight d3, he resigned. There's nothing else he can do if the king goes otherwise. Let's say king a3, rook a2, and maybe even b2 here. Yeah, b2. I thought this should win. Rook c5, king d6, and my pawn will promote on the next move. So yeah, this is just winning. King c1 is given by the computer. What did I want here? I guess many things are winning. Maybe knight d3 just, and if king d1, I don't know. Maybe I can go b2 already. b2, I have to maybe win. Oh, he doesn't even get it, so I think b2 is... Yeah, b2 is just winning on the spot. Okay, so yeah, that's how the game finished, knight d3, and he resigned. So today, I have to admit, I was kind of lucky. I had a pretty bad position, at least he had one chance. This moment where he could have taken on d5. Let's just go back. Not here. Here. Instead of bishop h2, knight d5, and I would probably be under a lot of pressure here. Computer gives +1, so here I would have had to suffer quite a lot. But yeah, today I was a bit more lucky. It also happens. And yeah, now I'm in a pretty good situation, I would say. I'm on 3.5 out of 4. And yeah, tomorrow will be a super tough day. And already looking forward to who's going to be my opponent. For sure, it's going to be someone very strong. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's recap. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Other than that, thank you for watching and see you tomorrow.